This is the Lambda Cartel channel. So I'm Scott Nimrod. I'm here with Adam Wright, Mitchell Tilbrook, Odie. Sorry, I don't remember your last name.
Mbebu.
How you say your last name, Odie?
Mbebu. The G is silent.
Okay. And I'm silencing my cell phone. Pablo should be joining us soon. And the title of this YouTube Hangout is Nikeza implementing a data store targeting .NET Core. And as of an hour ago, Eastern time, 5 o'clock in the morning, there was a storm of tweets about data access and the options and the disclaimers. And so I guess this session is meant to discuss that and hopefully come out with an approach that we're just going to go forward on, or at least two options. That's what I hope to come out of it. What do you guys think?
Yeah. I think it's what we want, because the what's they call it? It's something I was looking at. I was just like, okay, what options do we have? How do we approach it? Are they really functional? A lot of things, and each of them have advantages, disadvantages, trade-offs, and all those kind of stuff. And coming up with a decision on what to do was just a rabbit hole. So I was like, it's better I bring it up to the rest of us so that we can discuss it thoroughly, see what other options are out there, figure out if there are other alternatives. So.
And you published this little table on the Nikeza GitHub in regards. I don't know what the title is, but I think it's like data access or something. So viewers can check that out. And
I'll paste the link to this thing. So, all right, we can continue, Scott.
Oh, that's pretty much it. I don't have to be the moderator. Pablo's here. He's pretty good at that. Pablo, unmute your mic.
Yeah, but did I just record a podcast like less than 24 hours ago?
Yeah, but this isn't a podcast though. This is an agenda for basically the data store for Nikeza. We're getting to a point where we can start talking about it.
Okay, so I woke up with the I didn't see the Twitter thread. I just woke up. You just briefed me, right? So I'll continue moderating if you want.
Yeah, I think you're pretty good at that.
All right. better at it than F sharp for sure. So let's see. So in a couple of words, so what's the issue and what do you guys think we should go forward with?
Odie, can you just repeat briefly?
Okay, so here's the problem. It's not really a problem, it's more like a challenge. So there are different ways of accessing like data in .NET in general, different strategies.
Yes.
So some of it, so in fact, the major ones I know of, like for accessing like SQL Server, is we have the classic entity framework that C# developers use a lot, which is all good.
Yes, that's an ORM, right?
Yes, that's a proper ORM end to end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's stay the hell away from that.
Fair enough. So here's the thing, right? Everything about entity framework is, to put it in a lighter term, anti-functional. Like everything that you don't like about that functional design doesn't like is everything that EF does.
Yeah, you're taking data, just trying to punch it into objects, and I mean like SQL data into punches, and that just doesn't really work. It's a lot of black magic, I know.
Why gotta be black?
Okay, a lot of white magic. Let's be extra offensive.
So there's a oh my bad. Sorry, Odie. I'm listening.
Okay, so ultimately, that's what works right now with Entity Framework Core. So if you are developing in C# with ASP.NET Core, and EF Core is like the obvious thing to use without question. It has a lot of advantages that comes with it. So it has database migrations, which allows you to essentially make a schema of what your database should look like.
Okay.
And then it will manage changes to that schema. So that if, for example, you had testing, QA, production, you don't have to manually, make the change databases separately. All you just do is, once the code is running in QA, it will run the migrations and update the database schema.
Yeah,
that's one advantage.
So basically, we're going back to the 90s, back to the early 2000s, where it was like do everything manually. There's no automation. If you want automation, you better do it yourself. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, not quite. So that link I sent, right, has a table that breaks down all the pros and cons, because it's like a very multi-dimensional problem, right? So in some cases you have that advantage. So like okay, so let me just continue. So with Entity Framework Core, right, you have the ability to create migrations, manage migration scripts and all that. You also have the ability to you also don't need, unlike the other type providers, like using type providers and all that, which I'll get to in a moment, you can build without needing access to a database whatsoever. It also has type safety, and it also generates the SQL for you. So queries that are written to Entity Framework, because you're writing like queries to a data structure, right? It's easier and clearer sort of when you like do joins and all those kind of stuff. Someone who is reading the query, even in F#, someone who is looking at the query can tell that, okay, this is the query part, and this is the what's the word? This is the part that is happening in memory. And also it has type safety, which means if you change a database table, or you change columns, or you add new columns, or you remove columns and all that, everything will work. The compiler will check all of that and let you know that, oh, so and so is not working anymore,
okay,
etc., etc.
Okay.
So back in, I think it was early this year, where I wrote a blog post on using .NET Core. Then it was still in the project.json days. I actually demonstrated the whole thing end to end, right? Demonstrated how to use Entity Framework Core just as is, and develop the whole application. The slight problem there is that it relies on dependency injection. That's number one. And number two, it required what's the word? It required anytime I used the migration tool to generate migrations, it wrote the migrations in C#. So I had to manually go and change all that C# code to F#.
Okay.
Do you think that's still the behavior today, a year later?
That is still the behavior today, unfortunately.
Okay.
Before I continue, okay, fine. I now went online, did some search. I saw a guy who did a very crazy workaround, which I pasted in the group. As the workaround was nothing short of nasty. The guy went to the migrations folder, created a sub C# project there, then used the C# project to do the migration generation. Then now reference that C# project on the F#. It was nasty. So someone in the Entity Framework repository now said, okay, fine. If you want to have like an F# migration generated for you, this is the blueprint of how you're supposed to do it. But ultimately, you would have to write that code yourself. You would have to write the code that does the generation. Admittedly, the code is not so difficult, but for me, a lot of things did not seem right with this Entity Framework, especially with the fact that we're using Giraffe and we're dealing with composing smaller functions together. There's one small problem with EF, is that it relies on an object called a DB context. That object is essentially like a representation of your database inside of your application. So it is not thread safe, meaning that you can't just have a static reference to it. B, it is not it's not cheap to create, so you can't just be creating new instances willy-nilly, or you can't just put it in a function and just create it willy-nilly. So it's something that you have to create once at the beginning of the request and pass it down along the request pipeline to anybody who needs it. You know, there has to be one per request, long story short. And the whole thing just felt nasty to me. So I said, okay, you know what other options are available? That now, you know, Scott now said type providers. Type providers make a lot of sense. They fix some of the problems we are talking about. So the two major type providers we know of are SQL clients and entity clients. SQL clients gives you the ability to just write raw SQL, and it will, using the database connection and all, it will validate. Or does it use the database connection? I'm not too sure of that, but I'll find out later. But ultimately, it validates the SQL, but you have to write it yourself. Okay, so there's that.
Okay, I'm okay with that. That's fine by me. Actually,
well, hold on. The type provider. I mean, I don't do this on the regular, but last year when I was messing around with it, it kind of has that entity framework feel to it, where like you just your properties are the tables within SQL Server, and you just add record.
There are two types.
Can I ask a question right here? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Is there like a second option for SQL where we just connect to the database?
Don't worry, I'll go through. I've not gone through all
and
the
just connect and just do the query and get the
No. What I'm saying is I don't remember having to. I'm not a SQL person. I hate it with a passion, right? Just like I hate JavaScript. Okay.
Man, no.
But, oh God. But what I wanted to say is I don't ever remember having to write query strings.
No,
right?
Shut up, because I'm not an F# person. And I just created my first pull request with the help of like other members, and I mean I'm still on cloud 9, so you know you're not. No. I mean, is that if I did it, if I was able to somehow go through death by a million paper cuts, then you will write some SQL.
Yeah, but
moderator. Let's talk about type providers and how what I wanted to express is that
then let's not use them.
Hear me out. I don't remember having to write any queries, any SQL stuff. It's pretty much like you take if it's movies, well, movies dot add my movie. Like I don't remember having to do any type of SQL sentence. So that's
because there's two type providers for the SQL. There's SQL type provider, which is one where you define it in terms of creating the types, and then type provider magics all the SQL for you. And there's the SQL client where you provide the raw SQL, and then it uses the type provider to validate the string.
So I'm talking about the first one.
Yeah.
What's the name of that?
It's called SQL type provider.
All right. So
that's the one where you do the types and it just infers the SQL from it. And the SQL client is the one where you provide it the SQL and it just validates it.
All right. So what's the disadvantages to using the SQL type provider in regards to .NET Core 2.0 preview?
Wait, no, we're in 1.0.
Preview.
So okay, to answer your question, Scott, like Mitchell said, we have the two types, the SQL client and the entity type, and so on and so forth. The two of them, however, use some, in quotes, white magic.
It felt so wrong coming from Commodity.
Sorry, Adam.
I mean, it's like a weight has been lifted off of Odie. It's like he's been waiting all his life to say it. It was like white magic. Like, oh snap. Much respect. Much respect for that.
Yeah, sure. They're hilarious.
Oh my god!
All right, so there's a magic that has to occur on .NET Core for the type provider, client, whatever it's called.
So to be specific, the magic in question is that the F# compiler has to work with the library in order to, figure out, to make the type provider essentially work. Now that F# compiler has to run off of something. So Don Sign now sent a post saying that, okay, fine, you can add some, stuff to your project or CS project or FS project or whatever that would essentially make the type providers run off whatever framework you have locally. So if you are building for Mono, you have to put a reference to the Mono F# compiler. If you're building for Windows, you have to put a reference to the Windows F# compiler, which kind of feels dirty a bit. Mind you, this is just for the build, so it doesn't mean that you cannot. It doesn't mean that you must target the Mono or the distinct runtime. No, it's just so that the F# compiler running during the build can run on something. So that is that's all well and good. It's just for me that just feels wrong, because that would mean that if we are building for Windows, we'd have to have special if cases in our FS project to build for Windows. If we're building for what do they call it, Mono, we'd have to have special cases in our FS project, which is all well and good, but it just feels hacky and dirty to me. So I'd rather wait until they sort out whatever type provider issues in this thing, or until they sort out the type provider issues. That said, we could still go that route, but everything is on the table anyway. So that's the reason why type providers are a bit of to me.
So we discussed Entity Framework, we discussed type providers. What's the other option?
The other option is good old ADO.NET. Mitchell brought this up. In fact, there are two other options which I'll get to. I'll get to the second one in a moment, because I think that one has a lot of discussion around it. But the first is the classic ADO.NET. So, what the advantages you get with that is that you don't need to write entities. You just write your SQL, you execute it. That works for .NET Core out of the box. No configuration required. It's straightforward. It's simple. It gets the job done. The only difference is that you don't have type safety. I think that's the only thing you lose, really, because there isn't much difference between the SQL client type provider and ADO.NET proper. The only real difference there is that the SQL client type provider does type checking for you, but the ADO.NET doesn't. And one other thing I didn't mention is that all the other approaches except Entity Framework it doesn't have support for database migrations, which means when we make changes to the schema, we have to somehow find a way of, should I say, replicating those changes across the different environments. So if we have test, QA, and so on and so forth, any of the other options other than EF Core would require us either writing SQL scripts and adding them to some kind of but we need to just have some kind of migration strategy anyway. Otherwise, someone will have to manually go and execute those scripts. So, but back to the ADO.NET, right? If we pick ADO.NET, the only thing we lose is essentially the same thing with the SQL client type provider, but we lose type safety with it. But one advantage that the SQL client type provider and the ADO.NET, regular ADO.NET have in common is that both of them are atomic in their IO operations, meaning that let's say you have the functional way is to have a function that just says get me data from the database, right? And it just gives you business objects that you want out of it without needing to pass too many dependencies. In fact, the only dependency really should just be the connection string. And ADO.NET and SQL clients type provider allow you to do that. EF Core and Entity, the regular SQL entity type providers, the downside with those other two is that you need to have a context that you're passing around. So that now brings us back to what I was saying earlier with respect to, us having a functional pipeline with the giraffe, async context and all that. Throwing in a context into the whole mix would be, I've not even been able to wrap my head as to how that would work. So, and personally, I just feel like as a functional, trying to solve it from the mindset of a functional developer, those two are just no-go areas in terms of the fact that we have to be passing a context around, and contexts are not something you can just create willy-nilly, essentially. So yeah, it tends to bleed into your infrastructure. That's the right word.
So Adam brought up the notion of NoSQL. Adam, are you available?
Yeah, let me comment on the SQL stuff for a second, and then we can talk about that stuff if you want. So I don't think we need Entity Framework or any ORMs for one main reason, and that's that our queries are going to be really, really simple. I think Scott could write the queries.
Thanks.
With a crayon. With a crayon. You can write with a crayon.
Exactly. We don't have a lot of data. I mean, the model is pretty simple in the application so far. I don't think there'd even be many joins at all if we use SQL Server or RDB, relational database. So I think just straight ADO is fine, or something small like if Dapper or something like that runs on it, that core would be perfectly fine for our needs. If we stick with the SQL route. Otherwise, if we do go to some kind of NoSQL thing, I'm unfamiliar with that stuff too, but I'm sure the learning curve would not be huge. But I'm guessing. Sorry.
Sorry, it's that I had this experience with MongoDB. I was stuck with it for like 3 years, and it just, I cry every time I even think about it.
There are other options besides Mongo, but yeah.
No, true. I feel the NoSQL option. I don't know. I think this is the classic SQL use case. Like, we just dump data, we get it, and
I guess it depends on your.
How do we handle?
Go ahead.
My apologies. So we do have images, right? The profile image.
Sure.
Does it make this
images are stored?
Throw that inside of a relational database as well?
No, links to images would be stored in a relational database.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So if I'm to say something, for the images, those ones can be stored either in blob storage,
yes,
or they could be stored in file system. That one is not really a problem.
Nope.
Yeah, one key advantage that NoSQL gives us, that we because if you look at all the other options I've mentioned, right, one key component that EF Core gives us that the others don't is being able to manage schema changes. And the advantage of NoSQL there is that there is no schema to speak of. So it would be that entire problem just goes away entirely. The problem of having to manage schema changes just vanishes if we go the NoSQL route, which is why it's just trade-offs everywhere that it's just so confusing which one to pick,
Yeah, I would just personally, it's not that I have a vendetta against NoSQL, but I have a vendetta against NoSQL. So I personally feel very strongly against it, because there's if we were doing like key value things, or using something like Elasticsearch or something like that, right? But when I hear NoSQL, immediately I feel like MongoDB, which is like the biggest option there is out there. But anyway, if we were going with NoSQL, which NoSQL database would it be?
I think we're ruling out NoSQL.
Are we?
No, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Are we really? Because I know MongoDB has problems with ACID transactions and all that. In fact, the don't get me started with my beef with MongoDB also. But like recently, was it? Yeah, it was Mongo. Recently, some hackers were able to encrypt people's databases and ask for ransom and stuff like that. So
yeah, because
there is a lot.
Yeah.
We used I think not we per se, but a friend of mine that I worked with, he decided to use a MongoDB for some kind of high performance application like that. And what ended up happening was that anytime there was like, you know, a power outage or shutdown or something, you know, something just happens, right? The guy would essentially lose records, because we later found out that no, Mongo doesn't like save to disk. So you may tell the data, save this object, and to tell you I've saved it, but that file is not on disk, and if anything were to happen to the server in between writes, that data is lost, which is just like, you know, DBAs would lose their freaking minds.
I did. I did. I mean, I used to have it. I used to use it in production, and you would like having the schema on the code. That was the biggest issue, because ultimately you end up having the schema, because like for some reason you're gonna end up referencing something here and there, and Mongo has something called embedded documents. But then what that does is that it takes the data from one document and just puts it inside another one. It doesn't create a reference. And so when you update that embedded document, you update it in multiple places, not in one place. So it's like the chances for error are just, you know, increase, and it becomes really slow, like painfully slow. I honestly wouldn't go with Mongo.
Sorry to cut you here, but that said, right, Mongo actually eliminates 90% of the problems we are talking about now.
You know
so,
what?
Like not Mongo specifically, but a NoSQL DB would eliminate 90 to
if you
almost
are
100% of our
against
problems.
writing, if you are against dealing with schemas, if you are against updating the schema, because that can be automated to a certain point. And I mean, I'm not against updating the schema, because once we get to 1.0, once we...
You said 0.1 during the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Once we just like give birth to the basic idea of Nikeza, you know, I don't think until we do that, I don't think we're gonna have a lot of schema changes, because like how many integrations are we gonna do? Like WordPress is sort of working, YouTube is there. Then we have what? Stack Overflow.
Well, you have, it's not just the sources. You also have the whole subscriptions feature, right? You have followers, you have people that you subscribe to, and so I mean,
but that's not that complicated.
Yeah. To Adam's point, it's still, you know, your typical small CRUD operations. I really, regardless, you know, I prefer to lean more on correctness and type checking. But if we do go the ADO route, I recommend that we probably have some really mature integration tests.
So what does Mitch think? Because he's being awfully quiet.
Good question.
And yeah, so we know how Odie feels, because I could get like, I know Odie doesn't really want to deal with you know, the overhead of SQL in terms of that maintenance, right? And I understand where he comes from. I feel Adam is pretty much on the fence. You know,
I'm with Odie.
Okay, you're with Odie. Scott, you are with whom? Scott is with Scott. So that list.
It's not that much.
He doesn't want to write SQL.
No, I don't want to write SQL, but if
you can avoid it, I mean, you can avoid it, because you have been leading the front end side.
Every project starts off small, I think, until it becomes successful, you know, in general. And like, so the thing is if I know Yagni, you ain't going to need it, right? I just want to make sure that things are manageable over time.
So Mitch, what's up?
Yeah, so I would probably like the SQL client if you're going to go for SQL, but it doesn't work in .NET Core. And that was kind of the biggest challenge there. The kind of platform I would think would probably be fairly friendly to like a key value database. So something like Azure's Document DB would probably work. So you just kind of throw computed blobs into it, because once you compute the data, like, you know, people's profiles probably won't change that much. So, yeah. Okay. Key value store will probably work really well. Apart from that, yeah, without the type provider support, can't use SQL client. So maybe ADO.
And so how do you feel about that context within ADO? Without
if you want to have a strong separation, and you could probably use the SQL client, then would just be to create like a separate process for dealing with the database, which then just exposes a maybe RESTful API, which you can then call into.
That's true. That's true. Like that database can also be extracted away. But wouldn't that just turn it into microservice?
Yeah, probably. Is there a problem with that?
Yeah. No. Well, we did say we were going to go with monolith.
Yeah, because if you
but it could be like another integration.
Yeah, because if you have a service talking to a database, then you don't have to use F#. You just have to have the service be constrained to the types that F# expecting.
I'm not against that idea. I mean, it does add another layer to the back end. However, we can go with something else with another language, not necessarily be F#, like you said. I feel Odie twitching from that idea a little bit.
you already know me well. Okay, so
but I do, however, I do prefer that over NoSQL, because I've been burned by the OSQL train, and I'm just traumatized with it, and it's not logical. I don't have a logical argument against it. I just not really. So but wait, but I don't know where Mitch stands, right? Mitch made a good argument for multiple things, but where do you actually stand? What's your what's your opinion? I would go for this.
What's my opinion?
It doesn't need to be educated.
Well, yeah, it's kind of hard because I've been doing a lot of mobile dev stuff lately and been using a NoSQL database on that. So
another one for NoSQL. So I'm going to lose.
Yeah,
nobody's saying Mongo, by the way.
No.
Oh no.
No, the one I was using on mobile is called Realm. So, there's a bunch of key value databases you could probably use, and there's all the cloud providers have key value databases, and the way the app looks now, putting everything into key value blobs would probably work pretty well.
Yeah, that is true, right? So no MongoDB in something that has a better track record of actually storing your data. I guess I'm okay with that, and I mean, majority decides, right? So Odie,
yeah.
Sorry I interrupted you, but I was waiting for the knife to go in from Mitch's side. So Odie, let me make a question. So do we really have to go with MS SQL? Can we use something like Postgre and use the Postgres feature where we can dump the JSON directly into the database. Does MS SQL have that
Server
feature?
supports that, I thought.
The latest
It does?
version.
Yeah, SQL Server, I thought supports
Yeah.
it now.
Yep.
It does. It
Yeah,
does. It's
yeah.
available. You can dump JSON into the database.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Do you think the mm,
You can
This
query
is-
it too as if it were like a NoSQL database.
Correct.
Right. So.
Okay,
All right, so we
so-
made our decision. Cool.
No,
no, hold on.
but it's still that context that needs to be handled.
So here's my thought.
Well, no, hold on. The database context was entity framework specific. If
Yeah,
that's what you mean by context.
No, the where Odie was talking about the ADO, ADO, that you needed to keep a context of the
That's the entity
connection.
framework.
Yeah. It's
that was
The pool,
entity framework.
like there's no connection pool. There's one connection, and you have to like move it around.
Entity framework.
Yep.
That was entity framework. Personally, I would say I like the idea of the NoSQL, but like Adam said, it's actually the queries we will do are very lightweight queries. In fact, I'll be hard pressed for us to see where we do like joins across 3 tables. But that said, I'm leaning towards either we pick ADO.NET, that's just classic, using strings and all that, and maybe have stronger integration tests, or we pick a NoSQL database. The reason is that with the NoSQL, it solves most of our problems, and we get this thing for free. We get what do they call it? Migration for free. The only question mark in my mind is that last time I tried the document DB, it was wickedly expensive. So I ran hard.
Okay, so but NoSQL also has this issue where I don't know, like this used to happen to me, right? So, and I was using OOP, and so when I created my models with NoSQL, I had to tell my model that even though I'm defining, like this value, like I'm giving you this value, you're not going to have, there's no guarantee that that value will exist in the database because there's no schema. And so I had to manually check, and a lot of times even update the database with like do the migration of sorts, update the database. So there was some sort of normalization. That's how bad my use case was for that. So how would we deal with that, given that F#, like if we add a new type, or if we add a new field to a type, how would that work with NoSQL? Like, would we just accept the null? Is null a dirty word? Is that something that we'll just accept, and are we okay with that? Because we haven't really had a discussion of null, right? So how would that work?
Yeah. I haven't tried like NoSQL with F# before. So what may end up happening is that we may end up, with a situation whereby every single record we are dealing with will be option of something, and that is not really attractive from a architectural standpoint. I don't know. That's the honest answer. I really don't know, but I think it's worth trying out and seeing how that goes. But I like the approach of the ADO.NET because we don't have all those problems that I just mentioned with the other stuff. The only downside is we don't have type checking on strings, and we don't have a strategy for migration. If we could find, I don't know, there was one migration library that I used to use back in the day. I don't know if it supports .NET Core, but if it does, that would be awesome. But I think we just need to have that discussion.
Okay, so the issue would be migrations and dealing with the strings, right? I think the big issue would be migrations, right? Just because there's a maintenance overhead there. Because if you do something in development, then you got to pass it to staging, and then you got to pass it to production, right? You got to make sure that is handled, and obviously you don't want to butcher it because your data, right? And of course there will be backups and all that, but nobody wants to do a backup, right? Because that's extra work. However, on the NoSQL side, even though we wouldn't have migrations, having to use the option keyword, it's kind of dirty, like Odie said, and that means that we would also end up doing migrations of sorts. In order we could end up doing migrations of sorts in order to avoid the optional keyword.
Hold on, what's
so you're saying if you add a new column or something like that, and and the object doesn't support it, then we're going to have to add options, stuff like that, because it'll all be null values. That's what Scott was going to ask, I think.
I was going to ask, what's so dirty about options? And my understanding,
it could end up that your type could end up being eventually most of it options, and so you would have a lot of null data.
Well,
that's why I asked.
Either you get a value back or you don't, right?
So it's null a bad thing? Like having a null reference, it's a bad thing.
I think it's a bad thing.
Okay.
To me, null means it's not defined. And well, this is me and my ignorance. I'm not a database person, but I don't want anything to be null. Either we have a value or we don't. I thought that in last week's conversation with Mitch, when he was doing, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, when he was implementing the YouTube integration, the YouTube's API was all lists, right? And if you had something in a list, you did it. So that's another option, is return a list. But again, I don't know what I'm talking about because I don't do backends.
So Scott, sorry. So let me see if I can explain this to you, Scott. Imagine you had a record that represented, I don't know, user, for example, and user restarts the project, and user has user ID, first name and last name, all of which are strings. Maybe the user ID is a grid or something, and we ship the app, and then 3 people sign up, right? So all 3 records have user ID, username, and password. What now happens is, if tomorrow we now discover that, oh, okay, we now need to store age, for example, that means that we would have to add age as an option of int. The reason is that the moment we introduce age to the should I say record or something like that, it would it's the users moving forward that would have age. The existing users would not have their ages, so their ages would essentially be, in quote, null. That's from the database standpoint.
I understand that.
Yeah. So what may end up happening is, as that user object grows and grows, every new field in that record would have option of this, option of that, option of this. I
don't like that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
That's dirty.
No, so Mitchell just posted something called Martin. I don't know how to
Martin. Yeah, that's correct.
Martin.
It's a bird.
But there's
it eats birds.
It's a bird, but
no. It's this little mammal that eats birds.
It eats ravens specifically.
Yeah, it eats ravens. So the guy who made it was, I don't think he intentionally picked it. He just picked this animal, which happens to, retconned his own origin story.
So requires Postgres.
Yeah, it's something.
And we could use the SQL. We could use.
Oh, why are we doing .NET Core?
Martin Weston .NET Core.
I mean, you know, you.
Like these problems will go away.
I mean, we could use Elixir and just all these problems would go away.
Yeah, but then we have to talk to Rob Connery, and like, you know, he gets angry.
No, but mind you, Scott, is that don't forget I did this in regular .NET framework, right?
And what did you do?
So it was still as painful as I remember, right? It wasn't still. I never really got a clear-cut, easy, simple solution out of it. The obvious one, which I'm thinking that Scott is thinking in his mind, is if we move to regular .NET framework, we would use type providers and all would be well. Except that type providers don't solve our migration problem. So I had to use a separate library entirely. I think it is Fluent Migrator or so. And I had to write the migrations by hand, which was painful. So,
on a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult do you see us creating a little library that would handle, you know, not all of the work that migrations have to do, right? But at least, you know, differentiate between the environments and, you know, store the SQL that it has to do, like, or at least generate it, because it's not like we're going to be constantly adding tables and changing types, because once you figure it out, it pretty much stays that way. And this is also not a huge project where we are, you know, we're going to have constant changes to the schema.
I think it's easy to write, because all it just takes is just have a table called migrations, have a script that we would mark, and we would have to write the migrations in raw SQL. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you are willing to write SQL by hand, then all well and good, you have no problems. But if you want to automate that in some way, you know, something that can reliably go through, you know, your schema, figure out what the differences are. In fact, that's the whole point. If you remember, that's the whole point of having what's the word? That's the whole point of having entities in the first place, is that entity framework can look at those entities, figure out what the difference is, and write the script for you without you having to write it or make mistakes or forget to put particular, you know, fields and properties, etc., etc.
Okay, but even if we have to write things, like the SQL side would still be fairly simple, because, like, let's say we add a field to a type, right? Like, for example, or we add a new integration, which would pretty much be a new table. And maybe during development, we have to add a new field or something because we missed it. Once that hits staging or production, I don't see a lot of changes. So I guess it dwells into, you know, it dwells now to, like, how many changes do we expect to the schema later on? And I'm thinking less than, you know, like lesser, like not a lot.
So, like, if I'm going to write any tool, I think, honestly speaking, the one I would focus on right now would be the schema, the FS generator for what do they call it? Entity Framework Core. Because, like I said, every other thing works. The only part that is missing is that what do they call it? Is the only part that is missing is that generating that F# files. In fact, if you are, you know, if I'm bullish enough, I can just do the database migration once, change the CS to FS files by hand, and we have our migrations up and running. But I just felt like okay. What? Okay.
I was going to say, can I offer an alternative solution?
Please do.
I don't know if anybody's played with SQL projects at all, But I mean, if you don't care about version to version
That's
to version, which is kind of what migrations are, from V1 to V2, V3, whatever, you can use SQL projects and keep track of your schema and run a thing that will diff, the existing project. I mean, this would be in source control and everything. Whatever that project is with whatever database you point at, and it will generate the diff script, and you can just run that thing. So if you're not really, I mean, you can check in the diff scripts if you want to for different versions of code and all that kind of stuff and keep them updated. So that's one way of dealing with it, as opposed to having to have specific ordered scripts and things like that for migrations. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, there's a good chance that will work, because the only thing I don't know is if they're supported in MS Build 15. So is this something we can build from the command line? Like the current, I don't know if I'm making any sense. The current FSproj tooling that we have with MS Build 15, whether it will be able to build SQL projects as well, so that we could, because I know I've used it a little bit, where it allows you to make changes inside this SQL proj, and it will generate the migration scripts for you. So what I don't know is whether we can build that from MS Build 15, whether that is supported.
I know there's a command line tool for it. I could check. I would guess so, but I'm not 100% sure.
So let's play around of, wait. So Mitchell is AFK. So when Mitchell comes back, let's play a lightning round of. Oh, okay. So Mitchell is back. So let's play our lightning round, because we keep going back and forth. Let's play a lightning round of voting. That's it, because this is a damned if you do and damned if you don't kind of decision, where ultimately you have to make a compromise on something. And so at this point, I guess we have a rough understanding of the different things. And I mean, it's not like this is, it's not like the process has been smooth from the start. so we're sort of expecting pain and suffering either way. So let's go with a vote and go down, a route, and just say, okay, we'll go with that, and to hell with everything else, and like majority type of thing.
Hold up, before we do that, is it worth discussing quickly the other side that's not technical, the political side of this? So what we're doing is pretty groundbreaking. Let me start over. Groundbreaking, and we're open sourcing our discussions about how we're building this open source project. If we want to get, for lack of a better term, publicity or public relations, whatever you want to call that stuff, should that also feed into our decision?
Either way, I'm going to hype it up. Right? Either way.
If we want to attract attention based on certain people that can help promote us as a group, and which ultimately promotes us individually, should that also contribute towards our decision in addition to the technical arguments?
I think any of the options does provide for that ability to promote. Because if you pick something that a technical evangelist or someone who, like, if you pick something that someone disagrees with, that right there it has a bigger chance of being a promotional tool than picking something that they agree with, because they will go to war with you, nicely most of the time.
If the F-Sharp Foundation were sitting in, if a member of the F-Sharp Foundation committee was sitting in, which they're not, and I'm just throwing this out there because I'm thinking out loud right now, so I'm sure it sounds retarded, right? But if we wanted them to vouch for us and to basically, for lack of a better term, somewhat sponsor, what we're doing, what would we veer towards to appease them?
Well, we are the Lambda Cartel, right? Like the Lambda Cartel. So we don't really play by anybody's rules.
I hear what you're saying, but from a political perspective and for promoting what we're working on, and so that we can actually have more eyes on this project and also the delivery and adoption, I'm speaking from that term. And again, this is all new to me. So like a lot of things that I'm saying, there's people probably shaking their head like, what is this dude talking about? And that's perfectly okay,
I agree.
I don't know what I'm talking about. But I think it's important that we at least discuss if it's important or not.
So I understand what you're saying. My experience is that people will watch you crash and burn. They will stay up all night and watch you crash and burn. But they will not stay up all night, like applauding what you're doing. They will go to war with you. They will. And that, in terms of promotional, considerations, that's the thing you want, because then you can approach the situation, and just bring the tech. Let's talk tech. Here's this, here's that, and you can have debates openly, and yeah, that would work. However, it does create it has a downside where it's not for everybody, right? It depends on your personality, and if you don't want to have that friction, because it will be dealing with friction, then you're not going to be for it, and so I mean, that would be my biggest issue in terms of politics. Like if we pick something that people are really against or rally against or don't like, it might end up burning out one of the members, right? And or maybe like making them feel uncomfortable in a way. But like Lambda Cartel, we really want to do things like the fact that we're using .NET Core, being very vocal about it, at least on my end. It's already creating, enemies even within the groups, and I'm looking at Scott, right? So, so what? So politics, yeah, sure. I mean, from my point of view, I say bring it, and I guess it's part of the vote, because if you are not comfortable with that, then take that into consideration and say, okay, so I don't want to deal with any of that. I don't want to do anything controversial. I want to go within something that politically, for me, is more safe. And that's okay, and that's definitely okay, right? Because that you should wait. You should make that decision with that information. So, I mean, at the end, anything we do, it's got to be.
If you do, damn if you don't.
Yeah, and it's going to be. It can be promoted, and you're gonna have people nitpicking. Like if we go with Postgre, for example, Martin and Postgre, people are like, oh, you didn't use MS SQL. Like why are you going out to Postgre, which is not a database that's proven or something like that, right? What if you have to do a shard? What if you have to shard? What if you need a cluster? Yeah. So why? And if we go with MS SQL, like Postgre, people will say, like, hey, you didn't use Postgre. Why? Like Postgre is the open source database. Like, why didn't you use this? So
yeah. So I have something to say. I think we should, keep all the politics aside, because irrespective of, like you said, irrespective of what we pick, it's not going it's going to get its own vitriol. But aside from that, I think to answer your question about what if one of the members of the F Sharp Software Foundation was here with us, actually there is. I am one of them. But
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, you can just go and register. There's nothing special about it. Just go register, you become a member.
Just like one of those online churches. You can become a minister. Because I will be an F Sharp member of F Sharp Foundation member if it's that way. Like
Seriously,
I will put that on my. I will put that on my resume. Like,
yeah, I will too. I'm gonna do that.
Yeah, or we can the Lambda Cartel can be a member of the F Sharp Foundation. I mean, that's social engineering right there. You know,
exactly.
And I mean, see, that's the promotional side of things.
Okay.
I mean,
Odie.
Go ahead.
Yes, so sorry. So like, you know, from what I know about the F Sharp community is that they are happy to see anyone who is at least using F Sharp to do something. It doesn't matter what technologies you pick. In fact, the more diverse the technologies you pick, the happier they get, really, because it's like every time you go for an F Sharp, they show an F Sharp conference, they're trying to figure out like who can bring out the most weirdest concoction of technologies. Like you hear someone using Cassandra and F Sharp and the R and all kinds of things mixed up together, mashed up together. They celebrate that, they love that, you know. But then there is also the flip side of the evil empire, aka Microsoft, who would look at it like, okay, why aren't you using NC framework? Why are you using this and so on and so forth? The truth of the matter is, Microsoft doesn't really care. They don't really care about F Sharp.
Yeah.
All right, so here's my last argument, and again, I don't know what I'm talking about because I don't really do things heavily on the database. Okay, but my argument is this: I think that we should strongly consider MS SQL or SQL Server, should I say? And my reason for that is, even if things don't play nice now in regards to .NET Core or any of the frameworks like Entity Framework Core or type providers or anything like that, that's now, and that we always in the future have a conversation about still operating on the same database, but using a different framework to basically perform CRUD operations on there. So at least the database will still persist, but the gateway to the database we can swap out, even though we have to put in some additional effort in refactoring that layer or that gateway. So to make a long story short, I recommend that we should consider keeping SQL Server and swapping out whatever we need to swap out if we need to, you know, if as time provides in the future, if it ever happens.
That's a good point, because it does future-proof a little bit, and that's a good point, you know. And it's, I mean, I think it's yeah, I think that's a safe assumption, as safe as we'll ever be with this discussion. You know, like MS SQL, yeah, we can sort of proof it, and I mean, Postgres is also supported, but I know that you have to jump hoops because since it's not a Microsoft product, Microsoft will, you know, unwillingly make you jump hoops in order to use products that are not theirs. So,
well, what I have to say about that is the other technologies like Postgres, SQL, and so on and so forth. One of the push towards the .NET Core is that, you know, those other database providers are well supported in .NET Core, probably more supported than Nah, that's a lie, but they are well supported. Long story short, like Entity Framework Core supports Postgres SQL well. It also supports Document DB and so on and so forth. But there's also the elephant in the room, which is our hosting, right? Hosting, deployment, and all of that. So that also matters as well. So if we say we are going to pick, Postgres, we have to figure out how to, deploy that. Do we deploy it in its own container? How do we swap out the data from the container, etc., etc. And but if we decide to pick something that's already hosted for us, like SQL Server, like DocumentDB or MongoDB or whatever database technology we pick, as long as it's already hosted for us, maybe like I know Azure SQL, it has a free option, so it's not like you must pay to actually use that database. I think we have to really look at, the hosting of the database as well. Like, how is it going to be? How does it play well with our infrastructure? How are we going to? Because that's another thing too. If you decide to have your, for example, let's say we have the application in Azure, but we have the database in maybe AWS or something like that, you have to also think about the latency between the data centers and all of that. But if you picked, Azure SQL, you have little to no latency whatsoever between the you could even deploy it in Azure in such a way that they are actually resident in the same data center, that kind of a thing. So I think
that's a political option, because if we pick something that is supported in Azure, we can then play, not play, but try and negotiate with Microsoft and say, hey, we're doing a lot of promotional, things here. Mind giving us some Azure credits
and a flight to a conference to talk about what we did.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we can play that, and a flight from Australia, right? Not like, what's the point of this? Who's farthest away from Seattle? I think, yeah, you or Odie. I think Odie.
Oh yeah.
All right, so let's vote on. It sounds like, correct me, right? It sounds like there's really two things to vote on: the actual data store and then the actual gateway to be used for that data store.
Yeah.
Either way, whatever data store we pick, then I would go. Honestly, I would go with MS SQL.
I'm going to MS SQL.
That does, even though it's not fully open source like Postgre, it does provide future proofing, and you can also, it does give us that option to say, here's how we tackle this problem, and like promotional wise, it's very strong. And so a lot of .NET shops out there, that's what they use.
So that's 2 votes. Is it just 2 votes for MS SQL for the actual data store?
Honestly, I don't want to vote for MS SQL because of migrations. Like, take that from someone who has to manage infrastructure in his day job. It is nasty. And it's not just managing infrastructure. Like, imagine 5 of us working on the same project, right? We can't put the connection string in a live connection string in what do they call it? We can't put it in our server, and managing that migration across all the different copies of the database that we have locally. That is one area I don't want to get into. So I would support some form of NoSQL implementation so that I don't have to deal with that migrations. And we could pick DocumentDB if we want Microsoft's political backing, Azure DocumentDB or whatever the case may be. But that migrations thing is what keeps me up at night. It's the only reason I'm even, because if you remove migration off the table, right, I can easily pick any of the other, either the type providers or the what do they call it, the ADO.NET. But migrations is my biggest headache, really. So I would support that we pick a NoSQL store.
Okay, so the vote of Postgre over MS SQL.
Let's go back, because I thought that if we pick MS SQL, then I thought that the argument was that Entity Framework will help us out with the migration, and they'll generate scripts to reflect the latest schema.
Not really. So it's only Entity Framework Core that would give us the migration ability. All the other options, the type providers and the ADO.net don't do that. You'd have to have your own separate data migration strategy.
And
Separate.
Adam was saying that the SQL Server, whatever, on Visual Studio was SQL Server project. Does that help alleviate the lack of a better term, maintainability?
It does, but somebody still has to manually like execute them on both. So the advantage of doing it from so the advantage of doing it from Entity Framework is that Entity Framework, you could put it in the starting of your application so that your application would execute those scripts against the database. You don't have to manually log in with the credentials to the database server and now execute the script. So what will essentially happen is each environment would have a connection string attached to that environment, so that once your app loads up, it pulls the connection string, looks at the database, figures out what has changed since the last time it looked at the database, and do the migration automatically. If you use the SQL project, I don't know if it even works from .NET Core with MS Build 15, but if it does, somebody still has to like execute it against those connection strings independently. So as a developer, for example, if you got the latest code, you would have to manually just run it as well. So yeah.
All right, so Odie, what are you voting on, Odie?
So like
he said NoSQL. He said NoSQL.
Any form of NoSQL looks really good. So it looks really enticing to me. If we can't go with NoSQL, then ADO.net. So
and ADO requires what database? Postgres or MS SQL?
Anyone we like. Anyone we like.
And between those two, what would you pick?
Yeah, MS SQL.
MS SQL. So that's 3 votes for MS SQL. Yeah.
Well played.
Nice.
Well played.
No, I didn't like no. So because that was the question, like either Postgre or MS SQL, right? That was the first question.
Oh.
No.
I always pronounced it Postgres. I didn't know. All right, whatever.
Yeah, if it's Postgres or MS SQL, clearly MS SQL. Yeah.
No, but Adam, what's your point?
So that's 3 MS SQL.
If we're just asking the Postgres MS SQL question, I'm definitely a MS SQL person.
Okay, so Mitchell voted Postgres. Why? So what's your logic? Because I want to hear that. 4 against 1. I want to hear that dissenting opinion.
I just wanted to try and use Martin.
Okay. So we are taking that totally away from
I think Martin uses the Postgres JSON. So I suspect it's doing serialization under the hood, because in the docs it talks about the JSON.NET. So if you want to remove the whole thing of migrations creating like null records, well, if you're using JSON.NET, couldn't you just configure JSON.NET to return empty string?
I guess so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but there's still that the infrastructure side of Postgres.
Well, you
can put it inside a container.
Azure has I think it's free Postgres. It's like I looked at this calculator and the first option is like no money a month. I'm like, oh, brilliant.
You can't use Martin on the Azure Postgres.
They haven't upgraded it yet, have they?
No, it's brand new. All the service is brand new.
Maybe we can if we'll $10 server on.
Yeah, you'd have to make a your own server. Yeah.
I mean, that's not bad.
So for the actual data store, it seems as if MS SQL has been selected or nominated or whatever the right term is.
But it's now 3-2 because now I go with Mitch.
It's still majority.
Still a majority.
Someone from outside wants to.
No.
So we've agreed. Scott's writing
that was the first question too.
Go ahead.
Come on, man. We gotta make a decision on this. on the data store. Then we got to make a decision on the gateway.
Just start with
it's
ADO and MS SQL because like that's
Yeah.
literally the simplest thing you can do.
All right,
And then
so-
if it becomes too much of a pain in the ass,
Do
then
we
look for an abstraction.
do we need to make a decision on the gateway? Who's to say that for different libraries they can't use a different gateway?
It could be different queries even that use different gateways.
All right, so is that okay?
I think it makes sense. Like
To defer
Mitchell
that
said,
decision of not locking into a specific gateway or data access. Maybe that's a better term.
What do you mean by gateway? Hold on. What do you mean?
Data access.
Yeah, but what do you mean by that?
like
framework
ADO
for
versus
accessing
Unity framework.
The data.
Okay. So, so I guess MS SQL, and what you're saying is let's not pick yet.
What I'm saying is, do we really need to pick a data access framework?
Okay, with like entity,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we don't have all the features from it, so I guess no.
And it kind of provides freedom for people to do whatever they would like to do without them feeling confined.
This feel like the testing, discussion we had, like the unit testing discussion we had.
Don't bring that up, please. Don't bring that up.
Where we then said, to hell with it, let's go with the default option. If I were to ask you, what's the default option in this scenario, given what we are using, right? .NET Core and F#, all that, what would be like the first thing coming to mind?
ADO.
Depends on who you are.
No, but everybody just say it. Like, what's your opinion on that? Like,
I would use ADO, but I mean, if you ask a normal Joe Blow, he'd probably say Entity Framework. But I don't know.
and Odie, like,
Yeah, the default would be entity framework. If you asked the regular person, however, that's with C#. Anyway,
but F#, but within
that's
our
the thing.
It's
That's
not
the thing.
F# ready.
That's the thing. We are the ones deciding what the default for F# should be right now. Because like I'm serious. I don't know anyone who has done anything data access in F#.NET Core. I want to see even one example.
So Mitch,
as like a default, if you're on core, probably ADO.NET at the moment. This type of has become available SQL client.
so that's 3 for ADO. That's 3 opinions, not 3 votes. Like 3 opinions.
That's 3 votes, man. I'm ready to wrap this up.
So can we just say F it and say ADO and go back to sleep?
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay, so I agree. So let this be a moment in history. Like, this is the moment where the first flames of the fire that consumed this ship.
What?
Like, this is when it went down. No. So since we are trailblazing, right? We are being pioneers in this in a way. Let's do that. And I mean, that does bring up that promotional aspect that Scott was bringing up, and so now we can do, like, since there are no other options, this is what we're doing. And I know people in the F# world will rally, around this issue. I mean, I once wrote about F# idioms. Like, what is idiomatic F#? I made a 5-sentence blog post, and I still get emails. So yeah, I guess this is the option.
This was productive. I think this was really good. It's good we recorded this, man. Seriously. A lot of people are going to use this as a reference point for what not to do.
But so ADO supports any database?
Yes.
Oracle, yeah.
Yes, any database.
Okay. Okay. So
Any RDMS, any relational database.
So we can. Okay, but we're still going with MS SQL because I don't want to take that toy away from Scott. You know, it's too much. It's too much for him. No, that's cool.
All right. Closing arguments, if any.
Closing argument is that I need to eat some pasta. I need some carbs. I need to drink lots of water. I feel like I just ran like a marathon, like a mental marathon with, on my bare feet. Wow. So, closing statements. Can anybody help the moderator, because the moderator is just.
Are we at the point to start writing to the database?
Yeah, at least I feel like we're there, because like getting the data from the WordPress feed, I would immediately dump it into the database and then pass it over to. And then the front end can access it, right? Like okay. I am ready for the database because I want to populate it with data that then we can, serve.
WordPress appears to be implemented. YouTube appears to be implemented.
WordPress is quote unquote because it's very dirty.
I said appears to be, yeah. And the last major one, which is really important, is the Stack Overflow. And so I'll archive that conversation for another time.
Good.
So, all right.
Okay.
I don't have anything else to say.
Okay, so all right. So closest statement is that we just realized that there really aren't any documented instances that we can refer to, because there's probably somebody in production that has done this already, but they can't talk about it, or they're not willing to talk about it because they live in a cloud of shame, right? And so we will probably, seems that we are the first openly open project that will tackle this and will document the whole process, just like we did, the discovery process. So that means that the difficulty level has been upped at least a couple of thousand points. Like if I was having issues with doing the WordPress integration, which was working with JSON and XML, this is going to be Pain City, right? The silence is deafening.
I thought that was a rhetorical question.
No, I'm seeking psychological help here.
Not really. Before I can get to the mute button.
All right, let's be out, man.
All right. So, are we turning this into a podcast?
Yes.
Okay. So this has been episode 9 of the podcast. Let's see if we can make it to episode 10 after the discussion. This has been Adam Wright, Scott Nimrod, Odie Mekdu, Mitch Tilbrook, and Pablo Rivera. And so we'll see you soon. Bye.
Deuces.
Bye.